My name is Hannah Blake, and I'm 34 years old. Days before Thanksgiving, my own mother called and banned me from our family dinner. She told me I wasn't welcome unless I apologized to my sister. What she didn't know was that I was the one paying for that dinner, that house, and their entire lives. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon, a day so ordinary. It felt insulting in retrospect. I was in my home office, a space I'd curated to be my sanctuary. It was minimalist and calm, painted a soft gray, with a large window overlooking the Nashville skyline. My desk was made of reclaimed wood, clean and organized, holding nothing but my laptop, a single notepad, and a cup of black coffee. I was deep in my work, analyzing quarterly reports for my firm. The numbers on the screen were a comfort, logical, predictable, and fair. They behaved exactly as expected. They didn't lie or manipulate, they just were. When my phone screen lit up with the word mom, the familiar knot in my stomach tightened instantly. It was a physical reaction I'd had since I was a teenager, a Pavlovian response to her ringtone. No call was ever just a call. It was a summons, a complaint, or a prelude to a request. I let it ring twice, taking a deep breath to steady myself, then tapped the speakerphone button. I didn't want her voice that close to my ear. "Hi, Mom. Hannah," she said. The single word was heavy, devoid of any warmth. It was her courtroom voice, the one she used when a verdict had already been reached. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." The question was a formality. She believed nothing I did was as important as whatever she was about to say. "I'm working," I said simply. "What's up?" "I'm calling about Thanksgiving," she began, and I felt my shoulders tense. I knew this was coming. The fallout from Chloe's birthday dinner 2 weeks ago had been a storm of angry texts and silent treatments. I had been waiting for the final shoe to drop. "Your father and I have been talking it over, and we've made a decision." I stayed silent, staring at a complex graph on my monitor. I focused on the clean lines, the logical progression of data. I tried to anchor myself to it. "We don't think it's a good idea for you to come this year," she said. The words were delivered with the flat finality of a doctor delivering bad news. There was no room for discussion. A bitter taste filled my mouth, but I kept my voice even. "Okay," I said. The single word felt pathetic, but it was all I had. "It's for the best," she continued, her tone implying this was a mature, reasonable conclusion. "After the scene you made at Chloe's birthday, the tension is just too high. She's still very hurt, Hannah. You have no idea. This is a family holiday, and we simply cannot have that kind of negativity under our roof. We need peace." My sister, Chloe, the eternal victim, the sensitive soul whose fragility was a weapon she wielded with expert precision, and my mother was her willing accomplice. The scene my mother referred to was me speaking a single sentence of truth after years of silent endurance. "So, to be clear," my mother's voice sharpened, driving the point home, "you're not welcome, not unless you call your sister and give her a full, sincere apology for what you said and for ruining her birthday. Until you do that, you're banned." Banned. The word echoed in the quiet of my office. It was such a harsh clinical term. You ban a criminal from a store. You ban a troll from a website. You don't ban your daughter from Thanksgiving. You don't ban the person who quietly pays the mortgage on the very house you're banning her from. The irony was so thick, I could barely breathe. For nearly 2 decades, I had been their silent partner, their emotional and financial janitor, cleaning up messes they refused to even acknowledge. And my reward was exile. I thought of a dozen things to scream into the phone. I wanted to list the bill payments, the credit card debts, the secret bailouts. I wanted to ask her when she had last worried about the electricity being shut off or a late notice arriving in the mail. I wanted to shout, "Who do you think pays for the roof over your head? Who do you think keeps your perfect little world running?" But I said none of it, because in that moment, a profound and devastating clarity washed over me. It wouldn't matter. The numbers, the facts, the truth. None of it would ever be more powerful than the story they had written for themselves. Chloe the victim, me the villain. Arguing was pointless. It was like trying to explain color to someone who could only see in shades of gray. "I understand," I said, and my voice was a ghost. "Good," she replied, satisfied. "I'm glad you're finally seeing reason. It's the right thing to do for the sake of the family." I clicked the end call button before she could say anything else. The silence that filled my office was absolute. I stared at my reflection. In the dark screen of my phone, a 34-year-old woman, successful, independent, and utterly alone. They thought they were punishing me. They thought they had all the power. What they didn't realize was that they hadn't just banned a daughter, they had just fired their benefactor, and they had no idea how severe the consequences of that would be. Growing up, our family was a small solar system, and my sister Chloe was the sun. Everything and everyone revolved around her. She was born with a certain kind of light, a bright, dazzling charm that made people forgive her for anything. I was more like a distant planet, quiet and steady, essential to the family's orbit in ways no one ever bothered to notice. I have a memory from when I was 10. My great-grandmother's antique crystal vase sat on the mantelpiece, a relic my mother treasured. One afternoon, while Chloe and I were chasing each other through the living room, Chloe's elbow caught the edge of the vase. It tipped, wobbled for a heart-stopping second, and then shattered on the hearth. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet house. Chloe's face immediately crumpled, and she let out a wail. When my mother rushed in, she saw Chloe, the sobbing victim, and me, standing frozen in shock. "What did you do?" my mother demanded, her eyes fixed on me. Before I could even speak, Chloe pointed a trembling finger. "Hannah pushed me," she cried. It was a lie, but it was the story my mother wanted to hear. I was grounded for a month. Chloe was given ice cream to soothe her fright. I learned a valuable lesson that day. In our family, the truth didn't matter as much as the narrative. This dynamic colored everything. When I was 16, I brought home a report card with straight A's. I had studied for weeks, sacrificing weekends with friends. I handed it to my mom, my chest swelling with pride. She glanced at it, her lips a thin line. "That's nice, Hannah," she said, placing it on the kitchen counter without a second look. Just then, Chloe danced in, holding up a piece of paper, with a lopsided crayon-drawn flower on it. "Mommy, look what I made in art class." My mother's face lit up. She gushed, calling my father into the room to see. "Isn't she just a natural artist? So much heart." The report card was forgotten, buried under a pile of mail. My accomplishment was quiet and academic. Chloe's was emotional and visible. There was never a contest. When my dad lost his high-paying job at the manufacturing plant, the unspoken rules of our family became my burden. I was 17. The tension in our house was suffocating. I'd hear my parents whispering about bills. Late at night, their voices strained with a fear they tried to hide from us, but they only hid it from Chloe. I was old enough to see the panic in their eyes, so I went out and got a second job, bussing tables at a greasy diner on top of my shifts. At the local grocery store, I'd come home late, exhausted and smelling of stale coffee and fried onions, and slide a crumpled wad of cash onto the kitchen table before I went to bed. The next morning, it would be gone. My mother would never mention it directly, only saying things like, "We're a little tight this month, so don't mention it to Chloe. We don't want to worry her delicate nature." Chloe, meanwhile, was busy being a teenager. She needed new dresses for dances, money for concerts, gas for her car, a car I helped pay the insurance for. Her needs were always immediate and emotional. My contributions were silent and practical, and therefore, invisible. This pattern solidified as we became adults. I chose a career in finance because I craved the stability and order I never had at home. I was methodical and disciplined. I saved. My money, I invested wisely. I built a life for myself from the ground up. My family viewed my career with a mixture of confusion and disdain. At family dinners, when I tried to share a success, a promotion, a successful project, their eyes would glaze over. "Oh, Hannah," my mom would sigh, "always so serious. All those numbers and spreadsheets, it sounds so cold." Then she'd turn to Chloe, who was working on her art and perpetually broke. Now, Chloe is the one with real passion. It's so much harder to be an artist. You have to be brave to follow your heart like that. My success wasn't a source of pride for them. It was proof of my coldness. My financial stability wasn't a blessing. It was an obligation. I was the family workhorse, the designated adult, the scapegoat for their anxieties, and, most importantly, the solution to the problems they refused to solve themselves. I was reliable, and in their eyes, that made me responsible for them. It was a role I never auditioned for, but one I was forced to play for 20 years. My role as the family's secret benefactor began not with a grand gesture, but with a slow, creeping sense of obligation. It started with small things. A phone call from my dad, his voice heavy with a forced casualness that I came to recognize as shame. "Hey, Hannah girl, you know that old oak tree in the front yard? The big storm last night knocked a limb loose, and it's hanging right over the roof. The tree guys want $500 to take it down. I'm just a little short until payday." I knew he hadn't had a steady payday in years. I said, "Don't worry about it, Dad. I'll take care of it." And I did. I transferred the money and the branch was removed. There was no "thank you," just a relieved sigh on his next call, as if the problem had magically solved itself. The requests became more frequent, the emergencies more dire. My mother called one winter, her voice a panicked whisper. "The furnace went out. It's freezing in here, and the repairman wants $900 up front." I paid it. Chloe called me, crying hysterically, because she'd gotten a DUI and needed $2,000 for a lawyer. I paid that too, my stomach churning with anger and pity. Each payment was a patch on a sinking ship, and I was the only one bailing water. The turning point, the moment my role shifted from helpful daughter to primary provider, came when I was 27. I was visiting my parents and went to get the mail. Tucked between a credit card offer and a local newspaper was a thick, ominous envelope with a red-stamped, urgent, final notice on the front. It was a foreclosure warning from their bank. They were 4 months behind on their mortgage. My blood ran cold. They hadn't said a word. They were going to lose their home, the home I grew up in, and they were too proud or too ashamed to tell me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my apartment, staring at the numbers in my own savings account, money I had painstakingly saved for a down payment on my own place. I thought about all my sacrifices, the vacations I didn't take, the older car I drove, the modest apartment I rented, and then I thought about my parents being kicked out onto the street. The choice felt impossible, but also inevitable. The next morning, I called their bank. I navigated the automated menus, my voice tight and professional. I paid the entire past due amount, plus the late fees, in one staggering transaction. It wiped out nearly half of my savings. Then, I did something that would change everything. I set up an automatic monthly payment for their mortgage, transferred directly from my account to the bank. They would never see a bill again. They would never have to ask. The problem, I told myself, was solved, but I didn't stop there. To avoid the panicked calls about utilities, I systematically took over every one of their household bills. The electricity, the water, the gas, the home and auto insurance. I set them all to auto-pay from a separate account I funded every month. It was easier, more efficient. It was the financial analyst in me, creating a seamless system to manage a crisis. But it was also the neglected daughter in me, desperately trying to earn a love and respect that was never offered. I was trying to buy my own peace of mind. They never acknowledged it. Their lives simply became easier. Their money problems vanished. They stopped having whispered, worried conversations over the kitchen table. They accepted this new, stress-free existence as if it were their due. My mother once said to me over the phone, "It's such a blessing that your father's pension is finally enough for us to live comfortably." His pension was a pittance. I was their comfort. I was their blessing. But I remained invisible. The most painful part was funding Chloe. Her credit card statements would arrive at my apartment, forwarded from my parents' house. They were filled with charges for expensive dinners, boutique clothing, and art supplies that never seemed to produce any art. My mother's justification was always the same. "Chloe just has a harder life, Hannah. She feels things so deeply. She needs more support." So I paid. I paid for her life of feeling deeply while I was living a life of working tirelessly. I was funding the pedestal they placed her on, building it higher and higher with every dollar I sent. I kept telling myself it was what a good daughter did, that family loyalty was more important than money. But with every quiet click of the confirm payment button, a small piece of me chipped away, ground down by the weight of their silent, crushing expectations. The end began at Chloe's 32nd birthday dinner. She chose Aria, the city's newest and most ridiculously expensive restaurant. It was the kind of place with tasting menus that cost more than my first car, and a wine list that read like a novel. It was a place designed for people to see and be seen, and Chloe loved nothing more than being seen. Of course, she had no intention of paying for it. The unspoken assumption, as always, was that I would handle it. In an effort to avoid any awkwardness at the end of the meal, I called the restaurant ahead of time and gave them my credit card number, instructing them to take care of the entire bill for our table. I told myself it was a generous gesture. I wanted, just for one night, for us to feel like a normal, happy family celebrating something. The evening was a masterclass in my family's dysfunction. The tension was a fifth guest at the table. My parents hung on Chloe's every word as she complained endlessly. Her landlord was a tyrant for asking for the rent on time. The gallery owner who had rejected her latest work was a Philistine who didn't understand true art. The world was in a grand conspiracy to keep her from her rightful success. My parents nodded sympathetically, murmuring, "You just keep trying, sweetie, and don't let them get you down." I tried to participate. I asked my dad about his garden. I asked my mom about her book club. Their answers were brief and dismissive before the conversation invariably swung back to Chloe. I mentioned a major project I had just successfully led at my firm, one that had consumed my life for 6 months. My mother patted my hand and said, "That's nice, dear," before immediately turning to my sister. "Chloe, did you tell Hannah about the new shade of blue you discovered?" I felt myself shrinking, becoming invisible again. I was just the wallet, the silent benefactor meant to fund the stage on which their family drama played out. The final act came with the check. As we were finishing our dessert, the waiter approached the table. He smiled warmly at me and said, "Ma'am, everything has been taken care of as you requested." My dad looked confused. My mom looked flustered, but Chloe looked directly at me, a slow, malicious smile spreading across her face. She leaned back in her chair, a picture of smug indulgence. "Of course it has," she announced, her voice dripping with condescension, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Hannah has to show off. She always has to be the big shot. With her money, making the rest of us feel small. You think you're so much better than us, don't you, Hannah? Coming in here, flashing your money around. You probably love that we're all so pathetic compared to you." Something inside me, a tightly wound spring that had been compressed for 20 years, finally broke. The years of biting my tongue, of swallowing my anger, of paying for her lifestyle while she insulted me, it all came rushing to the surface. The logical, controlled part of my brain shut down, and the raw, wounded part took over. I looked across the table at my perfectly pampered sister, who had never known a single day of real responsibility. My voice, when it came out, was dangerously quiet, but every word was like a shard of ice. "Maybe if you grew up and worked," I said, looking her straight in the eye, "you wouldn't have to rely on everyone else to pay your way." The silence that followed was absolute. It was more shocking than if I had screamed. My father's face went pale. He suddenly found the pattern on his dinner plate fascinating. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a theatrical gesture of horror. Chloe's face crumpled. It was a practiced, perfect performance. The tears welled in her eyes. Her lower lip trembled, and she let out a choked sob. She threw her napkin onto her plate, scattering crumbs across the white linen, and fled from the table, out of the restaurant, and into the night. The aftermath was swift and brutal. My mother turned on me, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury. I had never seen directed at anyone but me. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You know how fragile she is. You are a cruel, cruel girl, Hannah." She and my father got up and left, leaving me alone at the table for 6. Surrounded by half-eaten desserts and the wreckage of my own making. I sat there for a long time, the silence of the restaurant buzzing around me. I had finally spoken, the truth, and in doing so, I had just signed my own exile papers. 2 weeks passed in a state of Cold War. My texts went unanswered. My calls went straight to voicemail. I was being punished with a silence that felt both familiar and, this time, chillingly final. I knew a confrontation was inevitable. I just didn't know what form it would take. The official judgment was delivered on a Tuesday afternoon, a day I had been working tirelessly to meet a critical deadline. I was feeling a rare sense of professional accomplishment when my phone rang. It was my mother. I knew instinctively that this was it. I answered on speakerphone, placing the phone on my desk as if to keep a safe distance from her words. "Hello, Mom?" "Hannah," she began, without any preamble. Her voice was the one she used when she was deeply disappointed in me, a tone that managed to be both cold and heavy with martyrdom. "I'm calling because we need to address your behavior at Chloe's birthday dinner." I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. "I already know what you're going to say." "I doubt that," she snapped. "I don't think you have any idea how much damage you've done. You made a public scene and you humiliated your sister. She has been an absolute wreck for 2 weeks, crying constantly. You know how fragile her nerves are. Fragile nerves. That was the excuse for everything. Chloe's inability to hold a job, her constant need for money, her dramatic outbursts. It was all attributed to her fragile nerves. It was a lifelong diagnosis that absolved her of all responsibility. I told the truth, I said, my voice tired. I had replayed the scene in my head 100 times. My words had been sharp, yes, but they hadn't been untrue. The truth? She scoffed, and I could hear the derision in her voice. You were cruel, that's what you were. You sit in your fancy office, making your big salary, and you look down on the rest of us. You have no idea what it's like to struggle, to have a sensitive soul like your sister. Her life is hard. I wanted to scream. Her life is hard because I make it easy. Her life is a fantasy that I pay for. I wanted to list every bill, every debt, every single dollar I poured into the black hole of their lives so that Chloe could pursue her art and my parents could live in blissful ignorance. I wanted to ask my mother how she defined a hard life and if it included never having to worry about a mortgage payment or an electricity bill. But I knew, with the certainty of a lifetime of experience, that it would be useless. My financial support was a fact, but their perception was the truth they lived in. In their world, I was the cold, wealthy daughter, and they were the struggling, noble family. To challenge that narrative would be to shatter their entire reality, and they would never forgive me for it. So, your father and I have decided, she said, her voice turning firm and resolute. We are having our traditional Thanksgiving dinner next week, and we can't have it ruined by this poison. It needs to be a happy day for the family. I waited for the blow to fall. You're not welcome, Hannah, she stated, each word a carefully placed stone. We cannot have you here until you make this right. You need to call Chloe and you need to apologize. A real, sincere apology. You will tell her you are sorry for being cruel, for judging her, and for ruining her birthday. Until we get a call from her saying you have done that, you are banned from this house and from family events. Banned. The word struck me again, harder this time. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a decree. I was being excommunicated. My worth in the family was conditional, and the condition was that I had to finance my own humiliation. I had to apologize for speaking the truth. I had to apologize for their dependence. A strange, icy calm settled over me. It was the calm that comes after a storm has finally broken. The years of resentment, of feeling unseen and unappreciated, suddenly coalesced into a single hard point of clarity. They weren't just banning me from a holiday meal. They were, in their own way, giving me an ultimatum. And in doing so, they were giving me a choice. I could continue to be the person they needed me to be, the silent, obedient bank account, or I could finally be myself. I thought about all the holidays I had sat through, smiling politely while being ignored. I thought about the endless praise for Chloe while my own achievements were dismissed. I thought about the crushing loneliness of being in a room full of people who were supposed to love you, but who didn't even see you. And I made my choice. All right, Mom, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. If that's what you want. It's what's necessary, she corrected me, misinterpreting my acquiescence as surrender. Call me back after you've spoken to your sister. She hung up. I sat in my silent office, the city skyline stretching out before me. She thought she had put me in my place. She thought she had won. But what she had really done was hand me the key to my own cage, and I was finally ready to use it. That night, my apartment felt different. It was no longer just the place I slept. It was my fortress. The silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. For years, my evenings had been punctuated by a low-grade hum of anxiety, the dread of the next phone call, the next crisis, the next demand on my time and my money. But tonight, that hum was gone. In its place was a cold, quiet resolve. My mother had drawn a line in the sand. She had no idea I was about to walk away from the beach entirely. I didn't storm around my apartment in a rage. I didn't cry. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, sat on my couch, and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen illuminated my face in the dark room. There were no dramatic emotions, no thirst for vengeance. This felt less like an act of revenge and more like a necessary, albeit painful, amputation. To save myself, I had to cut off the part of my life that was poisoning me. I navigated to my online banking portal, the movements of my fingers on the keyboard sure and steady. The dashboard loaded, showing my accounts, my balances, and, under a separate tab, the long list of my scheduled payments. It was a digital map of my servitude. For years, I had looked at this list with a sigh of resentment. Tonight, I looked at it with a sense of purpose. I started at the top, the First National. Bank mortgage payment. Payee, Frank and Mary Blake. Amount, $250. Next payment date, December 1st. I stared at the entry. I pictured the house, the scuffed wooden floors in the hallway, the faint scent of my mother's potpourri, the porch swing where my dad had taught me how to tie my shoes. A wave of sadness washed over me, a grief for the family I wished I had. I remembered finding that foreclosure notice years ago, the sheer panic I felt at the thought of them losing their home. I had saved them then, but who was saving me? With a steady hand, I moved the cursor and clicked on the Edit Cancel button. A confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment? I clicked yes. The line item vanished from the screen. Next, the utilities.Nashville. City Water and Power. Payee, Frank and Mary Blake. Amount, $380. Next payment date, November 25th. I remembered a sweltering summer day last year. I'd called my mom and she complained about the heat wave. Thank goodness for the air conditioning, she had said. I don't know how people live without it. I had been sitting in my own apartment with the windows open, trying to save on my own electricity bill because so much of my income was being diverted to her house. The hypocrisy stung even now. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment? Yes. It was gone. The list went on. The home and auto insurance, a policy that covered the car Chloe was currently driving. Cancel? Yes. The cable and internet bundle. So, my father could watch his football games and my mother could stream her British mysteries. Cancel? Yes. Finally, I came to the last one, the one that felt the most personal. Monthly rent transfer. Payee, Chloe Blake. Amount, $1,500. Next payment. Date, December 1st. I thought of Chloe's Instagram feed, filled with pictures of her beautifully decorated apartment, her trendy outfits, her carefree brunches with friends. She curated a perfect life online, a life that I, her cold and selfish sister, was silently funding. She took the credit while I paid the bills. She had called me a show-off, but her entire existence was a performance staged on my dime. There was no hesitation this time. I clicked the button. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer? Yes. One by one, I dismantled the financial architecture of their lives. It took less than 15 minutes. There were no grand pronouncements, no angry emails, no warning shots, just a series of quiet, deliberate clicks in the sterile interface of my online bank. It was a bloodless coup. I wasn't destroying them. I was simply withdrawing. I was taking my resources, my energy, my very presence out of their lives, just as they had requested. They had banned me from Thanksgiving dinner. I was, in return, banning them from my bank account. The silence that followed felt absolute, clean, and profoundly, terrifyingly, my own. I closed the laptop, took a sip of my now lukewarm tea, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt the unmistakable sensation of freedom. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke up without an alarm clock. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom window, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel that familiar holiday dread, the knot of anxiety that came with preparing for a day of veiled insults and forced smiles. There was no turkey to brine, no passive-aggressive phone call from my mother about what time I should arrive, no mental gymnastics to prepare for navigating Chloe's moods. There was only quiet. Drove across town to my friend Sarah's house, a small, cheerful bungalow filled with the warm, inviting smells of roasting turkey and cinnamon. Sarah had been my friend since college, a steady, sane presence in my life who had witnessed my family's dysfunction from a safe distance for years. When I'd told her I wasn't going to my parents' house, she didn't pry. She just said, "Good. Our table is bigger than it looks. You're with us." Her home was a joyful chaos of people, a collection of other orphaned friends, her cousins, her warm and welcoming parents. They pulled me into a hug at the door. They asked me about my work and actually listened to the answer. They complimented the pie I brought. I sat on the couch, a glass of wine in my hand, and listened to people laugh, tell stories, and argue good-naturedly about football. No one was walking on eggshells. No one was performing. I felt a sense of belonging so genuine it almost brought me to tears. I was not the family ATM. I was not the responsible one. I was just Hannah, a friend, a guest, a part of the celebration. It was a revelation. As we all sat down to dinner, raising our glasses for a toast, I couldn't help but picture the scene unfolding 50 miles away. I knew their routine by heart. My mother would be in the kitchen, stressed and snapping orders, at my father, who would be trying to stay out of her way by watching the pregame show on the television I paid the cable bill for. Chloe would have just woken up, emerging from her room complaining that the house smelled too much like onions. They would be operating under the blissful assumption that their world was as stable and secure as it had been the day before. In my mind's eye, I saw it all happen around 3 o'clock. The turkey, which I had unknowingly purchased with my last grocery transfer to my mom's account, would be in the oven, its skin turning a perfect, crisp golden brown. My mom would be at the peak of her culinary stress, and then a flicker. The oven light would die, the television would go black, the gentle hum of the refrigerator would fall silent. I pictured the confusion. My dad yelling, "Mary, did you blow a fuse?" My mom's frantic reply from the kitchen, "Of course not. Frank, go check the breaker box." I saw my dad fumbling in the dark hallway, flipping breakers that did nothing. I imagined Chloe's annoyed sigh from the couch, her phone now the only source of light in the room. "God, can you guys fix this? My phone is at, like, 10%. The realization would be slow. The call to the power company, the automated voice telling them their account was past due, scheduled for disconnection. The utter disbelief. "That can't be right," my mother would stammer to the customer service representative. "It's on autopay. It's always been on autopay." Later, as they ate a sad, half-cooked meal by candlelight, the mail that had been delivered earlier would sit on the hall table, a ticking time bomb. Inside that pile would be the letter from the bank, its bold red overdue stamp a harbinger of a much bigger storm. And there would be another letter, addressed to Chloe from her landlord, a formal, legal notice that would shatter her world. At Sarah's house, someone put on music, and we started clearing the table, laughing about how much we'd all eaten. I felt a pang, not of guilt, but of a strange, detached sorrow. Their world was beginning to crumble, and it was my inaction that had caused it. But it was a world built on a foundation of lies and exploitation. I hadn't lit the match. I had simply stopped protecting them from the fire they had started themselves. The first week after Thanksgiving was a symphony of digital desperation, and I had a front row seat. It began on Monday morning with a single, confused text from my mother. "Hannah, the strangest thing happened. The power company says our account is overdue. You need to call them and sort it out. They must have made a mistake." I read the message and put my phone down. I did not reply. By Monday afternoon, the confusion had curdled into irritation. A voicemail followed. "Hannah, I don't have time for these games." I called the power company again and they said the last payment was declined. I told them that was impossible. "Did you change your bank account? You need to fix this. It's cold in here." Her tone was that of a manager reprimanding a negligent employee. I let it go to voicemail. On Tuesday, the true panic began to set in. The letter from the bank had clearly been opened. She called me 5 times in a row. I ignored each call. The voicemail she left was practically breathless. "Hannah, please call me. The bank sent a letter. It says the mortgage payment bounced. A bounced payment. That has never ever happened. There must be a fraud alert on your account. You have to call the bank right now. This is serious." Meanwhile, a separate storm was brewing with Chloe. Her text started as demands disguised as questions. "Hey, my landlord just texted me saying the rent is late. Can you check if the transfer went through?" When I didn't respond, the tone shifted. "Hannah, where are you? He's threatening late fees. Call him for me and tell him the money is coming." By Wednesday, her messages were a frantic, all-caps tirade. "I'm going to be homeless and it's all your fault, you cold-hearted bee! You are doing this to me on purpose!" I watched these messages and voicemails pile up with a strange sense of detachment. It was like observing a science experiment. For years, I had been the invisible force that held their universe together. Now, I had withdrawn that force, and their world was flying apart in chaos. They weren't sad that I was gone. They were furious that the services I provided had been discontinued. I went about my week. I went to work, had lunch with friends, went to the gym. I was living my life, a quiet, orderly life, while my phone buzzed with the frantic death rattles of their dependency. There were moments, late at night, when a pang of guilt would hit me. Had I been too harsh? Was this cruel? But then I would replay my mother's voice in my head. "You're banned," and the guilt would recede, replaced by the cold, hard certainty that I had done the only thing I could do. The final call, the one I knew I would have to answer, came on Friday afternoon. My mom's number flashed on the screen for the 10th time that day. I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and answered. "Hannah!" she shrieked, her voice a raw, ragged thing I hardly recognized. There was no pretense left, no passive aggression, only pure, undiluted panic. "Thank God! Hannah, you have to do something. The bank is calling it a default. They're talking about foreclosure. And Chloe's landlord served her with an eviction notice. An eviction notice. What is happening? What did you do?" The question, "What did you do?" hung in the air between us. She wasn't asking what was wrong. She was accusing me. I let her frantic tirade wash over me, a wave of blame and hysteria. I waited until she finally paused, her ragged breathing audible through the phone, and then I spoke. My voice was not angry. It was not triumphant. It was the quiet, steady voice of someone stating a simple, undeniable fact. "You banned me," I said. The silence on the other end was profound. I could almost hear the mental gymnastics, the frantic attempt to connect what I had just said to the chaos erupting around her. I continued, my words calm and deliberate. "You told me I wasn't welcome in your life. You told me not to come to the house, so I respected your wishes. I stepped out of your life, completely." I heard a small, choked sound, a gasp of dawning horror. She was finally understanding. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an oversight. This was a choice. But the bills," she stammered, her voice a weak whisper. "The mortgage. You can't just, we're your family. You were my family when you needed my money," I replied, the truth of it landing with the weight of an anchor. "But you didn't want me. You told me so yourself. You can't have one without the other anymore." The immediate aftermath of that phone call was a deluge of emotional blackmail. The begging began within the hour. My mother called back, weeping, alternating between apologies and accusations. "How could you be so cruel? We raised you better than this. Your father is sick with worry." My father, who hadn't spoken to me directly in weeks, left a rambling, disjointed voicemail about family obligation and disappointment. Chloe sent a long novel of a text that was a bizarre mix of a half-hearted apology, a detailed list of her financial woes, and a final parting shot about how my wealth had made me a monster. They thought they could trigger the old response, that a flood of guilt would be enough to make me turn the taps back on, but the well was dry. Their words, which once would have devastated me, now felt hollow and transparent. Their apologies weren't for how they had treated me, they were for getting caught. Their panic wasn't about losing me, it was about losing my income. The spell was irrevocably broken. After a week of their relentless campaign, I agreed to meet them. Not at their house, but at a neutral, public coffee shop downtown. It was important that I be on my own territory, a place where they couldn't trap me in old dynamics. They arrived looking smaller, diminished. My father had lost weight, and his eyes were shadowed with a stress I recognized from my teenage years. My mother's face was pale and drawn. They looked like people who had been forced to confront reality for the first time in a long time. My mother started, her voice trembling. "Hannah, we're sorry. We know we haven't appreciated you. We made a mistake," my father mumbled into his coffee cup, unable to meet my eyes. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I let them say their piece. It was a clumsy, fumbling attempt at reconciliation, but it was clear what they were really here for. After the apologies ran out, my mother got to the point. "We need your help," she said, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "The bank is giving us 2 weeks. Chloe has to be out of her apartment by the end of the month. We don't know what to do." I took a slow sip of my own coffee, gathering my thoughts. The old Hannah would have caved. She would have seen their pain, felt the crushing weight of her ingrained sense of duty, and she would have written a check. But the old Hannah was gone. "I won't fund disrespect," I said, my voice quiet but firm, echoing the words I had realized were my new creed. "For years, my support has been treated like an entitlement. You took my money, but you dismissed me, belittled me, and ultimately, you threw me away when I became inconvenient. That is over." My mother started to cry softly. My father just stared at the table. "But I won't see you on the street," I continued. "So here is my final offer. I am not giving you any more cash, but I will pay for 3 sessions for you with a top-tier financial planner. He will help you create a realistic budget based on your actual income, dad's pension, and whatever else you have. He will help you figure out how to live within your means. I will also pay the security deposit and first month's rent for a small, affordable apartment for Chloe. on the condition that she provides proof of employment. A real job, that is all. After that, you are on your own. Their faces fell. This wasn't what they wanted. They didn't want a plan. They wanted a magic wand. They wanted me to make it all go away, to restore the comfortable illusion they had been living in. But Hannah, my mother began, your father can't go back to work. And Chloe, a job? She's an artist. Then she will have to be an artist on the weekends, I replied, my voice unyielding. These are my terms. Take them or leave them. They left them. They walked out of that coffee shop angry and betrayed, unable to comprehend that I wouldn't simply fix everything. But a week later, after the reality of their situation had sunk in even further, my father called and accepted my offer. The months that followed were a painful but necessary recalibration for them. They had to sell the house I grew up in and move into a small 2-bedroom condo they could actually afford. My dad found a part-time job as a greeter at a hardware store, and Chloe, after a month of sleeping on her parents' new couch, got a job as a barista. I saw her once, through the window of the coffee shop taking an order, a strained and unfamiliar look of concentration on her face. As for me, I took the thousands of dollars that had been flowing out of my account each month and redirected them toward my own life. I maxed out my retirement contributions. I set up a monthly donation to a local animal shelter. And then I opened a new browser tab and booked a non-refundable 2-week trip to Italy. As I typed in my credit card information, my money, my trip, my life, I felt a profound sense of lightness. The weight of their world was no longer on my shoulders. I was free. I wasn't the scapegoat. I wasn't the invisible daughter. I was just Hannah. And for the first time, that felt like more than enough. Have you ever been taken for granted by the very people you sacrificed for? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more stories of betrayal, survival, and poetic justice, because sometimes silence speaks louder than money.